You've probably heard of the 5 whys exercise. This is a root cause analysis exercise. If you've ever been a part of an incident, some kind of outage in your job, then you may have encountered the 5 whys in the post-incident review or some kind of retro, a post-mortem. But in today's episode, I want to give you an additional tool to pair with the 5 whys. And I want you to be able to use this not only in a post-mortem, in a kind of retrospective fashion, but also in a planning position or in an analysis position. We've recently talked about setting up your New Year's resolutions for success, upgrading your resolutions. If you missed that episode, go back to the last episode of Developer Tea. That's where we talk about it. And in this episode, we talk about a handful of things. One of the things we talk about is ensuring that you have some kind of clear metrics, etc. One of the things we don't talk about, though, is matching your action to your intention. In other words, how are you going to actually operationalize, connect your energy, your spend, your day-to-day, your schedule? How are you going to connect that to those goals? Whether it's a SMART goal or however you've set those resolutions, how are you going to actually meet them? A lot of the resolutions, as we talked about in the last episode, especially personal resolutions, they tend to be avoiding something. All right, so operationalizing your avoiding probably depends on replacement. Okay, that's a I guess a side tip for today's episode. You're unlikely to succeed in your avoidance if you don't have a replacement. This is reasonably backed up by research that our avoidance techniques tend to fail unless we have some alternative action, some alternative, activity, for example. All right. So, if you're operationalizing the things, your goals that you have, then you should be looking at your time. You should be looking at how you spend your time. The vast majority of people who are listening to this episode right now, if I were to ask you, how did you spend your week last week? The first tool you're likely to pull up, and there's nothing wrong with this, is your calendar. This is for a couple of reasons. One, it's hard to remember. It's hard to remember what all did I do last week. I'm going to go back and look at some kind of tracking. Some scheduling tool is a good way to figure out where your time went. But it's also the case that very often we are not living out our goals. We couldn't say that we have a strategy. Okay, then this is what today's episode is about. That we have a strategy for where our time goes. Companies do this pretty regularly. They determine what is the portfolio of our energy spend. In other words, what percent of our resources do we want to put towards new projects versus, maintenance work? What kind of investment do we want to make on innovation? What kind of investment do we want to make on fixing bugs, for example? You may have a percentage allocation. This is a strategy. This is a forethought strategy for how you'd like to spend your time. And most individuals don't necessarily have one of these, don't necessarily have a strategy for how to spend their time. So in today's episode, I want to give you some basic tools for starting down the road of creating that time strategy, creating your personal resource spending strategy. All right. This is very similar to budgeting. It's very similar to, any kind of allocation exercise that you might have. But in today's episode, I want to talk about taking your existing spends and rationalizing exactly what those spends are buying you. What is your investment and what is your return? We're going to talk about that right after we talk about today's sponsor. Speaking of investments, if you are building websites by hand, if you are spending time on UI coding and hosting and security, and you don't have all of the experience to do infrastructure maintenance, if you just want to build a website, then you probably have dreams of making those things easier. Maybe some kind of automated process or a builder. That would be great, right? A website builder that actually works. It doesn't have limited control. Well, that's exactly what you're going to get with Wix Studio. It's a node-based builder that lets you add full-stack JavaScript code to any site. You're going to spend less time on UI coding, hosting, security, etc. And instead, you're going to be developing in your preferred coding environment, online at a VS Code-based IDE, locally through a GitHub integration, however you prefer. And either way, with Wix Studio, you're deploying in a click. You don't have to worry about maintaining the infrastructure because it's automatically maintained for your peace of mind. You can extend and replace hundreds of powerful business solutions and custom-built features with Wix's APIs and integrations. And when you need to speed things up, Wix Studio's AI assistant is on hand to generate tailored code snippets, troubleshoot bugs, and retrieve product answers in seconds. Work in a developer-first ecosystem. Head over to wixstudio.com. That's Wix Studio.com. Thanks again to Wix for sponsoring today's episode of Developer Team. So we're talking about this idea of the 5 whys. And usually what we do with the 5 whys is we go from some instance and we're trying to abstract outward. So think about this. Something happened. Well, why did it happen? We're trying to find the root cause, right? And eventually we will get to something that is probably systematic. But at each layer, there might be some action to take, which is why we want to do the 5 whys rather than trying to jump to, some intuitive systematic problem. Also, it should be noted that the 5 whys may have multiple branches. This is one of the criticisms of the framework, that one why doesn't necessarily lead to only one other why. You may have a tree structure. There could be multiple whys, multiple factors leading into whatever that lower level thing is. So you can imagine, the server let's say we got a denial of service error. Our server was overloaded. That's the first why. That we had a lot of traffic. Why did we have a lot of traffic? We released we had a sale and we sent a bunch of marketing emails out all at the same time. And so everybody who received the email is all clicking the link at the same time. And we didn't coordinate any of our scaling infrastructure to handle this load, right? And I'm going to walk through this whole thing just to kind of get to what we think is like a systematic problem, right? Okay, so why did that happen? Well, we could say, we released the sale because it's a part of our normal ops. Okay, that's kind of the end of that chain. But why did we not coordinate our sale release with some kind of DevOps response or pre-scaling or something like that? Right, that might be one chain to follow. And you could say, well, those two teams don't necessarily operate, with some kind of overlap. They didn't know. The DevOps team didn't have any visibility into these releases. Okay, there's some kind of operational problem to solve there, right? Maybe in the future you could improve by having these two functions communicate better, right? They're going to work a little bit closer together. So in the future, maybe the emails are released, as a trickle release, right? So that the overload is naturally managed by balancing the release of the links. Or if there's a timed sale, if we do need to release all these links at the same time, we can pre-scale our servers or whatever the plan is to manage that, right? You could ask one more why. How did we end up here is what that next level would be. Why don't these two departments communicate? And there may be some insights there. All right. So we're not going to continue. We could go into multiple branches of this. There's a lot of different things we could talk about with that. But instead, what I want to talk about is how do we apply this back to our calendar example? Because interestingly, calendar events or your meetings, these process meetings, tend to be the abstracted thing. They're on the other side of the why, right? You would abstract up to one of these meetings. So instead, what I want you to do is move it back down the other direction. And we're going to do that with the 5 whats. It's not a very catchy name, so I doubt it's going to go viral from this episode. But the idea is to break down what exactly is happening in the meeting. What exactly are you doing? All right. What exactly is it that you're doing with that focus block of time? And the goal is to move you away from abstraction, which is things like labels, right? You have a label of focus time, but inside of that focus time could be a whole vast array of things that you consider or you have labeled focus time. It might be administrative work that is more reactive in nature, or it could be proactive work, or something in between. It might be something like learning or investigation. This is somewhere in between kind of reactive and proactive. And once you can get down to the more the more action-oriented or activity-oriented description of what you're doing with your time, then you can perform a why and then go through the 5 whys again, right? So what is it about this activity that matters? Why are we doing this? And what this can do is it can lead you to recognizing that the way that you're spending your time has some goal that the activity doesn't necessarily line up with. In other words, the things that you are doing have evolved over time and perhaps have gotten away from your actual goals. I'll give you a couple of simple examples of this. Let's imagine that you have, on your calendar, you have a status meeting. You're a lead engineer. You have a status meeting with your manager and your manager's manager and all the other lead engineers. Okay, that are I guess like a peer level relationship with you that report to the same manager. Okay, why do you have this, or what is happening? Let's start there, right? So we're going to break this down into the activities that are occurring within this meeting. A status meeting. In this case, let's imagine that your status is each of you going through and giving metrics for the amount of code that you've generated in the last 2 weeks. Okay. So notice that what we've called a status meeting is actually, from a activity standpoint, all you're doing is reading out data. Now you can ask some questions at this stage. Okay, what about this matters? Or what about this is achieving my goals? Or what are the goals of this particular activity? You could also break that down further and say, okay, what metrics are we sharing? Are we sharing, how many bugs were closed? Are we sharing, and you could get down to the lowest level activity. And then you build back up to a why. All right, so why are we sharing these metrics? The concept of a status meeting tends to have a wide variety, and a lot of you probably have status meetings, some kind of status meeting on your calendar right now, right? There are a wide variety of reasons for a status meeting to exist. So if you start asking the why question in this example, it sounds like the why here is to produce the metrics. Now, you could ask the question, okay, what about those metrics is useful in this forum, right? Why are we sharing these metrics here? Because the next step in these why questions is probably going to lead you to asking more important questions like, why couldn't this be done in an automated fashion? Why couldn't we just generate these metrics for our, reporting chain? All right. So if you start asking these questions, you're likely going to uncover, the underlying motivations for these meetings, or you're going to uncover opportunities. Okay. And this doesn't just apply to meetings that you are pulled into. This applies to how you spend your time. So if you're saying, okay, I'm going to spend 45 minutes every week on Fridays learning. Okay, what does learning entail for you? Maybe it entails reading a book. Maybe it entails actually practicing with code. Okay, why is it that you're reading a book? Why is it you're practicing code? Not why do you want to learn? The important thing here is that you break it down to the activity. And that's really the insight I want you to walk away with, because why do you want to learn? Most people are going to answer that by saying, something generic. I want to always learn in my career. It's important to learn. I'm going to grow in my career the more that I learn. But if you ask yourself about the activity, why are you reading this book versus why are you practicing code? You may have a closer insight into how that's going to help your career, right? This particular book was recommended to me by my manager because they believe that it, provides insight into leadership skills, and I want to build my leadership skills. That would be one version of answering the why. That's very different than just the generic, why do you want to learn response. So again, I want you to kind of zoom out for a minute, and I want you to think about those goals that you have that we talked about in the last episode. The goals that you're developing over time, your resolutions, your resolve, the things that you care about investing in, and aligning your time to those goals. So as you're looking through your calendar, okay, there's kind of two ways to think about this. One is by looking at your existing calendar and trying to understand, how do my activities that I currently engage in, how do they map to my goals? How do they forward my goals? How do I want to shape the existing things that I'm doing in a way that can help me achieve my goals? Maybe you have things that are absolutely contributing to those broader goals that you have. Another way to think about this is to start with a clean slate. We've talked about this probably 100 times on the show. I don't know exactly how many times, but the idea is to build your ideal schedule, right? To take the goals that you have and to develop some list of activities, right? Again, we want to start with these activities rather than broad labels, because the broad labels are going to abstract away the ability to ask why. Okay. So if you said, I'm going to work on career progression, that's a label. That's a broad label. There's no activity described in career progression. So when you sit down at your desk, what exactly are you doing? Okay. If you had 10 people who all had the same calendar event called work on career progression, all 10 of them might do something wildly different. And in fact, all 10 of them may have activities that have wildly different levels of effectiveness. Okay, be more specific. Be more activity-oriented when you're talking about planning out your days, planning out that ideal schedule. What kinds of activities do you want to participate in? At what ratios? To what degree do you want to balance building versus managing? Maybe you want to pursue an IC track. Maybe you want to pursue a management track. Those are some broad level goals that you can then more tactically match up your activities with, right? Try to get down to the activity level so then you can match your what with your why. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Developer Tea. I hope this conceptually makes sense to you, breaking down these otherwise abstract concepts that you label in your calendar, thinking about things like, even in your personal life, you could do the same thing with your personal life, breaking down family time. What are you doing in your family time? If you're all sitting around looking at your phones, are you actually achieving the thing that you wanted to achieve when you said Friday night is family night? Or is there a different set of activities that you want to engage in? This is the kind of critical thinking I want to trigger in your brain with this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you again to today's sponsor, Wix. Wix has built a website builder, Wix Studio, the developer-first ecosystem, that you can spend less time on tedious tasks and more on the functionalities that matter the most to you and to your customers. You can develop online or locally. Whatever your workflow is, it's going to work with Wix Studio. You can extend and replace a suite of powerful business solutions and ship faster with Wix Studio's AI code assistant. All of that is wrapped up in an automatically maintained infrastructure for that total peace of mind. And so you don't have to go and learn a bunch about infra. Work in a developer-first ecosystem at wixstudio.com. Thank you again to Wix. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. We're moving right along into our 11th year. We've gone 10 years as of the 5th of this month, and you all have made that possible. I'm incredibly grateful that we still have, listeners, some people who have been listening for a decade to the show, which blows my mind, that we still have folks hanging around listening to the show that long. I hope it's been valuable to you. If it has been valuable, I'm going to stop right here and ask you to do 2 simple things. These are the things that give this show the ability to continue. And I really do mean it. If you've never shared this show with somebody, I am encouraging you right now. This will, by the way, it's a benefit to you. This person is going to think that you have given them something, even though all you did was share a link. And that's not because this show is the most wonderful thing to ever exist. It's just basic psychology. You're thinking about them. You send them something that you think is going to be valuable to them. That is a huge help to the show. It's also a huge help to you for giving them something, and you're building your relationship with that person. So that is a massive, massive help to the show. And then leaving a review. This one's less helpful to you, but certainly helps the show continue to succeed. We've built 10 years of content. All of it is free. All of it is free. All you have to do is spend your time listening to it. What I'm asking for in return is 1 review, right? If you haven't left a review for the show, please leave a review in your podcasting platform of choice, iTunes, if you are split between multiples. Thanks so much for listening. And until next time, enjoy your tea.